Thank you so much, Josh, for being here. It's great to have you. A little reminder, don't feel that you need to keep your camera off. Do just jump in with questions anytime. If you don't want to be the one to ask it, do send it through in a private chat and I can ask it. But these are for you, so please do just jump in. So, Josh, I wonder if we start with a little bit about you and your background and sort of how you got to where you are now.
Okay, yeah, sure. I am originally from Shropshire, in Shrewsbury, in the West Midlands, and I grew up in a very non-theatre family, but very music, kind of lots of music in the family. So I've always sort of been exposed to a bit of kind of the arts, but not loads. And then I started working at the local theatre when I was 16, as a technician, and had a real passion for lighting. Even kind of then, something about it really clicked with me, and did quite a lot of kind of dance work there, and lots of kind of like working with local theatre companies.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went and did a BTEC technical theatre course in Telford, at a college there, and had the best time. It was so good. Kind of did a bit of everything, but kind of it was so self-driven that I just really pushed my kind of real interests there, and then went and did a lighting design degree at Rose Bruford, for 3 years, in 2007, which is a very long time ago. And yeah, spent 3 years studying there, and then left. Well, I kind of set up a provocation for myself there, I guess, about how. Oh, hello, somebody's entering.
Yeah. All right, I'll let them in as they appear.
Cool. About using the use of video as a lighting designer, and I was really interested as a tool, but I didn't really know how to use it at that point. But I kind of spent some time studying it as a kind of art form at that point, and then I left there and then did some electrician work with Sherry, in fact, at like BAC and various venues around London, and then a bit of programming as well, and some associate work, and eventually I ended up at the Gate Theatre in Notting Hill, which is kind of where I really sort of evolved as a theatre maker, and as a lighting designer. And I did some associate work there for a while, and some kind of programming and chief flexing. And then they offered me a show there, in, I think it was like 2014. So I've been doing some kind of like fringe sort of design work up until that point. And then I got to work with Fly Davis, and Drew Christian, on a show there, and I think I really started to kind of cut my teeth in that space. And it's a very, very challenging space. It's very, very low, very, very long, and and then I kind of had a series of designs there that then kind of led on to other work, and then I've been designing full time since then, really. Yeah.
That's brilliant. And so when you graduated, did you know straight away that you wanted to do lighting and video, or did that sort of?
No, it wasn't a very conscious choice. I just knew that I was interested in it, and I was kind of interested in as a kind of, well, in fact, we went to see this amazing exhibition when I was at college. I think it's Anthony McCall, which is the film artist who creates these like geometric shapes, and he's been doing it for years. And they're originally on like analog 16mm, 8mm film that he just draw these kind of evolving illustrations of white lines and then project them through haze, which Sherry might have also seen, which I saw at
Serpentine.
Yes. We went there.
Oh, that's amazing.
That was a real catalyst point for me, actually, because I just really saw the potential of the fluidity of video, and how it can, and also the kind of the like structural, like architectural shapes that you can create from it from a light point of view. And something just like clicked in my head, and from that point, I think at some point in my work I wanted to try and use that, or kind of explore that kind of quality. So I think I did a show at the Yard in 2000 15 or 16, something like that, with a company called Game Show, where I used a projector to kind of light quite a lot of the show. And it was all kind of really basic, kind of just essentially just white shapes and like noise textures and like distorted kind of broken shapes. But we created a lot of like geometry in the show with it. And then that kind of then evolved into various shows that I've kind of worked on over the years. But I kind of love it as a medium. I kind of it's difficult to work with, but also kind of very beautiful if you can. And there's so many ways of working with it. You can be very, very image based, which is kind of where I'm heading towards now with my work, now that I've kind of gained the confidence to use it. But you can also be just so kind of like textural and structural with it as well.
Yeah, and do you ever struggle with? It feels to me sometimes that video and projection is such a hard thing to get into shows at. I don't want to say further down the chain. That sounds really terrible, but it involves such a resource and such a knowledge and such a time and a finance. And is that something that you've had to struggle with on the way to where you are now?
Yeah, definitely. I think I guess because I've always approached it from a light point of view, and if it feels like it's the right tool to use or the right like aesthetic or quality to use very early on, and I guess I've been quite lucky that I've kind of started on a more like fringe level with it, and then but then like studied and trained as an associate with more like West End kind of like I worked with Finn Ross and Nina Dunn and Dick Straker fairly early on as an associate, that I kind of learned the practice of it there, but I then kind of like snuck it into my process on a like fringe level, and then as that's kind of evolved, that's then what did I do? Oh yeah, that's then been built into the design processes of shows that I've worked on from the start. But I think I'm definitely not one of those. I feel quite weird and uncomfortable about bringing video in as a kind of tool to fix a kind of problem. I think I'm not that kind of video designer. It's sort of much more at the like conceptual level of the design. Whereas some video designs are amazing at just kind of coming in and like solving, like, you know, kind of bringing it in very late into the process and kind of really radically changing a problem that in the show that video can kind of solve. But yeah, and like from a technical point of view, it's always, or from a kind of budgeting point of view, it's something that I've kind of gradually worked out how to communicate that stuff to venues, but it's still difficult because there's such a nuance in every kind of setup and situation that you can never really provide the full answers at the start of the process. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and I mean a lot of the time, and you'll have had this in lighting land as well as video land. You know, people turn around to you and go, "Oh, we'll solve it with lighting." I mean, when you're there in a projection capacity, does that become, "We'll solve it with projection," and then you suddenly go, "Well, hold on, not quite."
That would take me 3 weeks. Yeah, sometimes, but I guess I've always been very clear with people that I'm not a filmmaker, and I'm not like a proper animator. So I've sort of made sure that from the start that's quite clear that that's not I can't provide those kind of solutions, but I can kind of work with it in the way a lighting design would work with it, in terms of I can kind of shape and mold something that's within our palette to kind of fix that problem, but I can't kind of whip out an amazing full animation or a kind of like film solution. But I mean, saying that, I've also worked with that as well. Like I designed a show with Belarus Free Theatre a while ago, and there was a lot of film footage that I used and kind of made in that. But it was quite experimental. It's a devised piece. So it kind of went with the nature of how we made it anyway. So it kind of the quality of the projections kind of evolved as we worked out what the show was.
Yeah, and if we look at the sort of work that excites you, I mean, you love work that has a bit of a message, don't you? I mean, what can you tell us a bit about what work really interests you, or what projects really interest you?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, I think I do really. I think I am drawn to work that feels like, I guess it's relevant, or it's got a kind of interesting message at this point in time. And I think particularly working at the Gate, it really opened my eyes to work that um, is bringing an alternative voice into the kind of conversation. And I sort of worked quite a lot with various like live artists when I was in around like 2013, 14, who yeah, their kind of work is very much driven by what they want to say with it. And I think, yeah, I just feel sort of there's a kind of responsibility. I don't know. I kind of enjoy that responsibility of, as a team, kind of offering up an alternative kind of viewpoint on certain things. And then I guess also the work that I've been doing with Rachel Bagshaw, which is very much about access and talking about and like challenging different ideas around what it is to be a disabled person or a disabled artist, and also what you need as an audience. If you need any kind of access like captioning or audio description, I think I found that kind of work really nourishing. Actually, I've just found it really. There's so much to kind of there's so much ground to kind of break in it, and also your sort of your main purpose is to make sure that the audience members that are depending on the kind of design that you're making, like captioning, that they really do, that it is really they're getting the best kind of possible experience out of it. Which, yeah, has really kind of changed how I think about our work, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then I also, saying that, I did get to a point in like a few years into so I guess it was like 2017ish, where I was doing or being being offered quite a few shows that were really like quite politically heavy and quite like challenging to make. And I think I just got to a point where I was like, I just can't take on this all the time. It's actually like quite full on for my mental health, and just kind of trying to keep positive. And I think it's when Trump was like in power, and just got into power, and Brexit was happening. And I kind of realized that actually you have to kind of really look after yourself as an artist as well, and like take on the work that you find really challenging and interesting, but equally also like bringing a bit of sugar into the process, and make sure that you're making work that is just enjoyable, and like a joy to make, but also a kind of joy to watch as well. Yeah, it's a balance, isn't it? I think I'm in that flux of trying to get that right. Yeah,
that's such a great. I love that, bringing a bit of sugar to it. That's such a great way to put that. It makes absolute sense as well. If we move on slightly to talk about Crave, when did you first hear of it? I mean, was it on the cards pre-Rona, as it were, or did it come about because of this?
Well, they planned to make the show in the Spiegel tent, which is their kind of summer temporary space at Chichester. And so I was actually approached to design it last, I think it was like November or December, something like that. And it was it was programmed to be in, I think, towards the end of the summer. So maybe like June, July, something like that. And I'd already committed to a show at the Royal Exchange by that point. So I had to turn it down, which I was really sad about, because I love working with Tinu and Alex. And Chichester is amazing. Like I really rate them. They're amazing. So that was on the cards, and then I was turned down. And then I think they just started the design process in March, but very early sort of stage when the lockdown happened. And then obviously I suddenly became very available again. But I didn't really hear. I'd sort of heard, like, I think I'd had a chat with Tinu, and she said that it was sort of on the cards that it might come back, but they were really not sure. So I heard nothing about it for ages and ages and ages, and then they eventually got in touch with me and said that they were looking at programming it in October, and whether I would be. In fact, I think they were going to program in September, and then they they pushed it back at some point. But yeah, so then I said that I was available, and obviously really interested because I'm really drawn to that kind of work. And then they told me that it was going to be the main house, which was a real shock because Spiegel tent to the main house is a big jump, especially when you've got Sarah Kane involved.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, and then as a lot of us have been experiencing, because so much of the staff are on furlough, and the producing team are kind of really, all the parameters are changing every week for them. I kind of had nothing for ages, so it was just penciled, and I wasn't sure whether I was doing it or not. And then fairly late down the line, I think it was maybe about 3 weeks before rehearsals started, we got it confirmed. But even then, there was lots of things to tie up because the live streaming kind of part of the contract is quite complicated now, in terms of like distribution rights, and because they wanted to capture it so they could then potentially put it on a platform for later on. So the actual the contractual part of it took ages actually. So I think I wasn't like officially fully on board until I think it was about a week and a half before rehearsals, which was a little bit terrifying. It's never been quite that last minute before.
Yeah, that is very last minute.
Yeah, but I'd kind of started working with Alex kind of as soon as I knew that I was potentially going to do it. So I had a little bit of a run in design wise, but it was still very, very fast, and they had to design it really quickly. Yeah. And
what was it that made you say yes to it? I mean, part of that, I presume, is that you'd worked with this team before and it was the kind of job you like. But maybe could you expand a little on why? I'm in total agreement with you on this. Why Chichester is such a great place to be?
Yeah, totally. Well, I get from Chichester's point of view. I mean, it's a really interesting venue because they have to program very carefully to kind of cater to their audience, and they've got a very specific kind of audience in terms of age band and also kind of their viewpoint on the world, I think. So they quite carefully program stuff that really is work that they really, really, really want to see, like a good old Gilbert Sullivan musical, those kind of lines. And then they also, Daniel particularly likes programming work that is quite, I guess, kind of provocative, but also kind of eye-opening to that audience, particularly from a kind of literature point of view. So I worked on Random Generations by Debbie Tucker Green with Tinny in 2018 there in the Minerva. And it was really fascinating because that play is incredible. Well, two plays are they're incredible, and the writing is so nuanced and also so authentic to the communities that it's talking about, that it felt really quite exciting and terrifying to put that in front of a very, very rich, white, privileged audience at Chichester, and quite how they'd respond to it. And we had an amazing kind of reaction from them. People were either really loving it or finding it very challenging, but then questioning why they were finding it challenging. Particularly in the Q&As, they were quite intense, but it felt exciting to kind of put that work in front of them. So I guess from the same point of view, with Crave, it kind of, and I think that's also why they wanted Tinny to direct it, because she kind of handled it so sensitively and carefully with Random Generations that it felt like she could do the same with Crave. And it is a really full-on difficult text to work with. It's like, particularly at this point in time, it's very heavy. But also with Chichester's, their team are amazing. Like their chief elects and lighting department are just the best. They're so calm and so good at their job, and they're resourced really, really well. They're the way, like, both from a kit point of view, but also just the way they support you. They're just so well practiced at producing that it's just really effortless. So yeah, from that point of view, I just knew I'd have a kind of a good time. And I think particularly working with this kind of text, it just, the thought of working in a theatre that was going to look after me really well and support me really well, just felt like a really nice thing to kind of ease myself back into designing again.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And also, I think lastly, also I just really needed some work, to be
Yeah,
honest.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Absolutely, yeah. It's. I think there's definitely a huge element of that, isn't there? And what were the parameters that they set out? I mean, in terms of, I know it was sort of ever shifting, but in terms of what the project would be, I mean, there must have been an element of pressure because you knew the world was watching. It was going to be streamed
Oh my God.
beyond the main house.
That pressure is really full on actually, because you particularly because we were live streaming previews as well, and I was like, oh God, I've not finished the design yet. Don't show anybody it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, but I was really excited about the live stream quality of it, and it was really challenging from lots of points of view. But yeah, I was really excited about a lot of people potentially being able to watch it, and because they're very lucky at Chichester because they've got such a big auditorium. It's normally like 1,300 or 400,
Yeah.
and it's very very wide and very like there's a lot of aisles, and it's like very good 50s 60s design, and so they could reduce their capacity down to 600 fairly easily. So so it was exciting to have like potentially a relatively big audience, like live audience, and also a live stream audience. And also, like, I think it's just that thing that we're all grappling with as theatre makers across the board is what do we make at the moment? It's just really hard to know, and I think there's a huge thirst for really like uplifting, life affirming, like easy to engage with work, which is vital and super exciting. But I think there's also a thirst for something that is a bit challenging and kind of like hopefully cuts into some of those quite cathartic feelings that we are all kind of trying to work out how to process at the moment.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and how present were you? I know it was a very very short rehearsal period, really, but I mean, did you arrive at the start and you were there, or did you arrive even later in the process?
Well, so it was really short. It was 3 weeks rehearsal, which I mean, it's only a 50-minute play, so what the material was kind of manageable in 3 weeks, but because of social distancing and also everybody just sort of remembering how to do our jobs again, it kind of there was definitely like a boot up sort of few days where everybody's like, okay, this is how this works.
Yeah.
But I live in Cornwall now, so I was in London and then I moved to Cornwall just before lockdown because my partner's got a job down here now full time. So that was a challenge in itself. But the great thing about Chichester is they've got accommodation as part of their site, and so that was all kind of manageable. But I couldn't be there for the whole 3-week rehearsal period because I had commitments here that I was working on. So I went for the first day and dropped off my iPad, and we did the read through, and we also just like it was just really nice to meet everybody in person again. And then I set up my iPad. So they put like production desks. We're rehearsing in the Minerva Theatre, which is empty at the moment. So, which is amazing because it's exactly the same footprint as the stage in the main space. And then they've got a big seating bank, so we could all have our own. They got all the production desks out that they'd normally get out for tech, and each member of the team had their own production desk.
Right.
Which was really effective and like super privileged to be in that position because it's very rare you get that. But it worked really, really well. I mean, meant that we could socially distance in a really kind of easy, clean way. But I had my iPad up on my production desk, getting the whole space in shot, and then I zoomed in to rehearsals over the 2 weeks, which was I wasn't sure how it was going to go, but actually it was really good. It worked really, really well. And I just had to make sure that I had all my communication channels going with the team. So we had like a group WhatsApp, and I was sort of emailing like Jenny, who's the movement director, thoughts from what I'd been watching, and we kind of had a conversation from that point. And it also meant I also somehow ended up becoming like the group rehearsal recorder. So
Okay.
I'd sort of be recording the rehearsals and then sending those recordings out to different members of the creative team. But the other great thing about it was also the other members of the team that couldn't be there, because like Ravi is based in Cornwall as well. Alex is in London, and they were rehearsing in Chichester. And Anna, who was on sound design, was also working in London quite a lot, because they were working as a barberette, because they found this job over lockdown. So we all linked into this one Zoom, and we could kind of watch together, which was really, I was very surprised actually how effective it was. And then I went up to Chichester for the final week of rehearsals, and then was there full time from then on.
And I mean, when it came to sort of researching the piece or finding inspiration for it, I mean, what is your process around that? What sort of things do you turn to?
Well, I think I really don't like to look at like previous versions of a show, because I just find it really, it just influences how I think about it, and I don't necessarily find that very useful. I think the script is always my first starting point, and just trying to break it apart in my head and try and understand it. And I think like themes and rules are kind of my sort of real. That's really how I devise my work, I guess, is that it's all about kind of working out the rules of the text, but also I guess the space that we're creating for it with the design, and also like movement. So we kind of had quite a lengthy chat between the creative team, so I read the script a couple of times. It's a really hard script to read actually, because it's so it's like 4 streams of consciousness really, that's very broken up. So it's quite hard to kind of make sense of, but you do get a real, I think we all realized fairly early on that you can't really make any kind of literate sense of any of the stories. It's all just about this sort of mood and feeling and like undertone that all of those stories create, in a very kind of poetic kind of way. So yeah, I guess it was just trying to establish in my mind what those qualities were, and then discussing that with Tinu and with Alex in quite a bit, and Jenny in quite a lot of detail, and just kind of and then I guess then starting to apply that to the design that Alex had evolved, and just trying to work out the rules. I think me and Jenny particularly work very much with rules. It's really hard to articulate this part of the process because it's so like ephemeral and weird in your head. Like I can't, because it also, each show is so different. Like some shows I'll sketch quite a bit. Other shows I'll Photoshop stuff, and quite a few shows I don't actually know. I don't really work in a visual way until I get into the space.
Nice.
Yeah, it changes all the time. But with this one, I think it was very much working with Alex about what the kind of, because he kind of come up with the idea of the light boxes overhead and the idea of isolating. And actually, he sent me this video of a catwalk, a fashion show where they were on travelators and they were kind of moving.
Okay.
Like super beautiful, smooth quality of light, which terrified me slightly because where he'd positioned the light boxes is exactly how you would achieve that kind of super kind of sculptural, beautiful, even quality of light. So so through kind of designing what those light boxes were and what fixtures we wanted in them and what kind of quality of light, I then kind of, because that was sort of our route for the whole design really, was what those kind of light boxes and what that kind of channel of light would really, how does that evolve over the show and how do we break it? And then also I get the other thing is the text talks, particularly towards the end, it references a lot of religious kind of biblical ideas and texts, and it references light very heavily. So there was a lot of discussion about what is that quality. And I think because Ravi, who was making all the film for the show, he was involved with the process a lot earlier than I was. he was kind of offering up ideas for those kind of moments of like dramaturgy and moments in the play that kind of felt really right and really interesting to explore. And I think I was quite aware that I had to be quite sensitive to not kind of overpowering where the video would kind of do that kind of visual work. And I think it's a really interesting thing with lighting video. It feels, because normally I'd have that battle in my head and kind of evolve that, what the balance of those two things are. But when you're working with somebody else, I find I really enjoyed it, because I was sort of, it was almost like going through the experience I'd normally go through in my mind, but with somebody else, but with their process. And I kind of learned so much from Ravi. But he's very much a filmmaker, and he doesn't really make any decisions until very late in the process. He kind of offers up lots of different ideas. So yeah, it was kind of just responding, not like offering up too many kind of solutions, because I knew that Ravi was also kind of offering up ideas for those, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. I wonder if this might be a good point actually to have a look at the model to sort of show for anyone that hasn't seen it, sort of what you were facing.
Shall I share my screen?
Yeah, go for it.
That one there. So let me just go. Can you see that?
Yes, we can. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, great. So we've spoken about script. Oh yeah, so just to sort of summarize a couple of things about the script, is there's no stage directions anywhere. There's no kind of context to the play. And what the characters are all just letters. There's no information about the characters at all. And quite a lot of the character information is very contradictory. So it's very hard to kind of make any kind of through line with any of them really. And it's very fast. Like it's just a constant kind of constant fragments of conversation. So it was really challenging to work with in some ways, but also weirdly like really freeing, because it's actually just about your instincts with it rather than trying to make any kind of logical sense with it. So this was the catwalk that Alex's only reference for me really was this.
Okay, gosh.
Which is a very different quality to where we ended up, but it's very much about black space being around it, and it sort of being these these kind of floating channels, which we kind of embraced, and we also really went against that in quite a few moments of the design. So then let me go to slide 5. Yeah, so this was the model box. So the floor and the wall and the back wall was a matching kind of grey, like matte grey. And then the video, and then the whole back wall was projected on with video. And we had 2 projectors up in the rig. And Alex was really keen for the kind of for the sort of tech tools of the show to be really kind of quite present and be on show. So then he also devised these light boxes that sit over each travelator. And then there was a camera in front of each travelator on the floor that would be used for live capture, both for the video design, but also potentially for the live stream. And yeah, because it was a grey floor and a very grey space, it really was asking for a very minimal kind of approach in the way I used it. But the big challenge for me was the revolve, because we didn't know when we were going to use it until tech. And potentially we could have used it at any point in the play. So I had to try and kind of anticipate that as much as possible. And also with the travelators, we didn't really know how we were going to use them until the second week of rehearsals. So there was a lot of fluidity in the space really, that I had to try and work out how to be really minimal and clean, but also be able to kind of work with any kind of scenario that came out of rehearsals. And also the theatre's in thrust as well, so you can kind of just see the edges of the audience seats in the image. And yeah, these were all the revolve kind of, these are the different options that Alex was kind of thinking of for the revolve, which eventually just turned into, which we thought was kind of our plan A originally, but you kind of have to go through all the different ideas to get back to your plan A. That it would just move in one revolve towards the end of the play. But I did have a few sleepless nights trying to work out how to light them, because the big problem was obviously with when as soon as they revolve, they go out of the linear lines of the light boxes.
Yeah.
And just how to kind of make sense of that, how to kind of work with that sort of disjointedness was something I was just trying to work out how to solve. But in the end, I didn't really need to worry about it too much.
I was going to say, what was the conclusion with that? I mean, what were your thoughts on that?
Well, it kind of, I think there was various different options and ideas being floated around about when and how it would move. And I think it was generally just trying to work out when all the rules and the kind of the design world that we constructed would break apart. And so our initial instinct is where we did the revolve in the final production, which was that kind of 3/4 section of the play, where everything becomes really disjointed, and it felt right for everything that we kind of become used to then break, and all of the kind of lines and shapes that we got used to would not be wouldn't work anymore. And then we get that really satisfying point when we return back to that for C's kind of big scream that she has in text. But yeah, it was. What was your question again?
No, it was just you mentioned the sort of the worry about when you weren't in linear world, and just sort of how the things that kept you up, like how did you end up tackling that non-linear world?
Oh yeah, well, I'll show you with the lighting plan, I guess. But I think I built in quite a few different forms of lighting the performers from different kind of angles, which, as I will share with you later, I later ditched. But yeah, I think I guess it was that thing, is that it felt like we needed to retain a really clear structure up until the point we broke it, and then the point that we returned back to it. And I built in different ways of kind of keeping that linear structure, but if they were at like 45 degrees or at 90 degrees, using different elements of the rig, which I don't think were as successful as they could have been, but you don't really know until you try it. And I think if I was to light it again, I would take a different approach with some of that.
Okay.
But you know, that's all part of the process, isn't it?
Yeah, totally.
So maybe it's a good point to talk over that.
Yeah.
In terms of the plan, can you see that? Okay, it's quite a big plan to put on a. It's a bit pixely. So this is my original plan, which is fairly crazy in hindsight, but you know, the creative process. And so they've got a kind of a mixture. They've got a kind of fixed rig that was already up. And the other thing that I kind of had to just really keep in mind is that essentially that I've only got 2 electricians available, because the rest of the staff are on furlough.
Right.
So it's just Graham and Steph, who are the chief and dep electricians, who were available to rig it. So part of the rig is kind of there already. It's part of their fixed rig that we just moved around, and then other parts I've kind of put in. So we've obviously got the light boxes, which we hired in, which are the X4 bar 20s, in 4 rows, and then they've got a stock of Encore performances, warm and cold, in house, which were kind of in fairly fixed positions, but I shimmied them around a little bit. But it was difficult because of the projection screen. I was really cautious about using front light in that far at that far extremity of the travelators,
Yeah.
because the light boxes kind of got in the way, and also it was the other thing with Chichester, which is tricky, is they're all on catwalks, but it's in the craziest like star formation. So
Yeah.
for a normal thrust situation where you haven't got linear lines in your set is great and works really well. But when you start introducing linear lines and very, very like clean, tight sort of shapes, it basically there's very few straight lines in the rig to try and work from, and where you think you can get symmetry, there's something in the way in the roof that means you can't achieve that symmetry. So I tried this kind of really quite steep top approach along each travelator, because I was just concerned about shifting from front light into that upstairs, because I could front light the first half of each travelator really easily and totally fine, but then shifting into that upstage section of the travelator, I couldn't take the same front light approach that I had that I could use on the front. So I thought, right, I'm going to use a uniform approach across the whole thing and see how I get on. So I went for this kind of quite steep front cover, which is all of that kind of whole mass of Source 426s overhead, and cutting those quite carefully into the travelator, which wasn't as successful as I was hoping it would be, but it was kind of it was kind of there as a if I really needed that uniformity, it was there. But it was just feeling too steep, and also it was kind of lighting into the floor because there was a grey floor around each travelator too much, and it just didn't feel clean enough. But once the encores that I've got on the front of house kind of bar, yeah, they're kind of front of house catwalk, in real life actually worked far more successfully than I thought they would.
Right.
And the way we could cut them and also frost them meant that when they did go onto the back wall, it actually looked a lot neater and a lot less problematic than I thought. So that was a really big revelation and something that I've been worrying about for ages. And then actually we tried it out and I was like, okay, great. I can actually go for a much simpler kind of palette. And we had like pars at the back that we had this idea for a particular moment when the revolve goes upstage that we didn't use in the end, but they were kind of there for that.
Okay.
And then I was also playing around with lighting the whole space with these kind of 3/4 back shots from the 2Ks, which looks okay, but I think we really got into such a kind of narrow band of palette with the LED sources that as soon as you put tungsten in there, it just felt really wrong.
Yeah.
There
It can be
was
tricky,
something
can't it? Yeah.
again, yeah,
I said it can be tricky, can't it? Yeah.
yeah, and I used them in 711, so I was trying to like emulate that kind of arc kind of quality, but even then there was a muddiness to it that just felt wrong. And I think particularly because we had the grey floor, it really kind of pulled out that kind of warmth, which just didn't feel right. So, and then I also put in these kind of on the outer bars to the left-hand, right-hand side of the stage, these kind of like pipe end kind of shots for when the revolve was spinning. And again, it just felt too, as neatly as I tried to focus them, when we put them on, we tried to use them, it just felt too complicated and too, like it just wasn't as sharp as what we'd got used to with the LED light sources. So it was a really interesting journey, and actually I've got a copy of the plan after tech.
Oh, okay.
This is my section. So I was just trying to work. So working around the light boxes was quite challenging, and then also the projectors, because everything was kind of in the way. And their rig is quite high. It's at 7 meters, or just over 7 meters, and the light boxes are at 5. So there's quite a lot to kind of cut around. And yeah, this is a kind of side elevation. Just working out the kind of mover, the encore kind of positions, as well as the front of house kind of shots. And I'm very, very old school with this, which I'm trying to get better at, but I still work in 2D planes rather than doing a 3D model. But I really
Yeah.
want to change that in my process. But it's
And why? Why, Josh? Why do you want to change it?
well, but this was a good example actually, was because when you've got, as I'm sure you all know, when you've got angles going on with your bars in terms of not lots of straight lines and
Mm-hmm.
bars at different sort of angles, like with their catwalks, it's
Mm-hmm.
really hard to try and visualize from a 2D plan exactly where a particular point in space will land with that diagonal bar.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I just realized with this, actually, if I did have a 3D plan, I would be able to go and look at that viewpoint more precisely, or not have to do so much kind of mental arithmetic to try and work out where that point is.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest problem I find is that not many venues have really got proper 3D CAD plans.
Yeah.
Or not enough of them do. So, and I never really have the time to go in and kind of convert that into a sort of accurate 3D plan. But I'd like to streamline that part of my process a bit and make it a bit better. Yeah, so this is actually this is where we ended up.
Wow.
A much simpler design. But I think there was a lot of jokes going on with the electricians about how little of the rig we use, but they were also in agreement that we had to kind of go through that process to kind of hone down and refine what actually was the right kind of look for the show. And yeah, it's always that slightly guilty feeling, isn't it, of putting all of those kind of things that you want to try out and that you think will be useful, and then when it comes to it, actually you knew they weren't going to be useful, but you had to go through the motions of trying it.
Yeah. And how much did you have to consider in terms of the fact that this was, you were lighting for a camera and you were lighting for 600 people potentially in a room simultaneously? I mean, that is a hard balance, but unfortunately one that I think is going to become very common. Like, how did you approach that at this point of plan land?
Definitely. Well, I think that's partly why I really over-spec'd the plan in lots of ways, is I was really not quite sure how the cameras would take to like quite high contrast, very kind of quite non-filled performers and images. So I think that's part of the reason I kind of really put a lot of different options into the original plan. But I think what I learned, and it is, I think as soon as you've got one reference point, which this is sort of my first proper reference point really, I will definitely approach lighting for camera differently next time. And I think a lot of that is actually in simplicity, and just making sure that you've got particular angles. You've got a lot of flexibility with particular angles. And I think also having the flexibility of color was like, we did very subtle, and also on camera you didn't really perceive it that much, but in the space we were doing like really subtle shifts in color between the front light and also the top light, and I think there is something about having a very flexible rig that allows you to respond very easily to the, as soon as you see what it looks like on camera, you can just adjust and tweak it. Whereas it feels difficult if you've got a very fixed rig or very fixed tools to use. I think that's, I don't know, it's interesting. It'd be interesting how that kind of evolves. But also one thing that, well, we'll get onto this later with live streaming, but we didn't have any kind of contact with the live streaming team at all until the dress.
Wow.
Which the theatre were completely realised was a mistake when we got to that point. And they were a really lovely team, but the play is so weird and difficult to watch, never mind try and film. That it felt like we needed like a couple of weeks of creative prep and meetings and time to kind of really get ourselves aligned and make sure that we knew how we were going to do it. So we really had to respond very quickly once we got the first edit through after that first dress, of how we were going to fix it, because it felt really, really wrong the first time they tried it out.
Right. Okay. Interesting.
So I'll talk about that later. But I think, yeah, it would. I think there's certain rules that we developed in the live design, which was really about darkness and depth, and like shifts of depth and darkness, that translated really differently on screen. Because in real life, I think our eyes really enjoy that shift into darkness and all the kind of different like gradients that you get with your eyes from that. Whereas on camera, it just feels really wrong, because it's just, the camera just doesn't have that I think awareness of depth, but also the kind of subtlety of how beautiful darkness can look, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Or got some. These are the fixtures. So these are the two things that we ended up using a lot, really. So these were the X4 bar 20s. And we had 24 of those in total.
Okay.
And it was a really interesting discussion, actually, because budget-wise, obviously the theatre were really wary about. They're really trying to claw back any budget possible.
Yeah.
And me and Alex kind of landed on the X4s as the solution. What we wanted to use. And they asked us to look at alternatives, and we looked and we looked and we looked and we looked, and we just couldn't find anything that that has the quality that they have, and the kind of they've just got such a specific quality of light to them, and sort of range. And we didn't use any movement in them in the end.
Okay.
We tried, but it just didn't really work. So they were just kind of fixed in their top light positions. But we used the pixel mapping a lot, and the zoom and the color mixing in them a lot. But it was just that like parallel beam quality to them that I couldn't find anything that was available, and also had that kind of like pureness of color in it.
Yeah, definitely.
So that was interesting. I feel like there's a big gap in the market there somewhere.
There is, isn't there? Definitely.
I mean, maybe specifically for Crave, but I think there's a few times I've kind of had this problem where the X4s are so expensive that we can't afford them, but there's nothing that quite fills that gap. And then we used the Encores a lot, and they were incredible because we used so much. There was kind of live moving all the way through, and they were just so precise and easy to use. And it's the first time I'd used the warms. I'd only used the colds before, and I was kind of blown away by how brilliant they were. And then I've got some images which I'm not sure whether you've seen. Some of you probably have all seen.
It's a very hard contrast, though. I mean, that level of high contrast on a camera is incredibly hard. I mean, was that something? I mean, cameras just don't want to do that as a thing. Like, they've got a thing in the background, and then they've got a person, and then they've got color, and like that's a lot. Did that become a problem at any point?
It was a big problem. And so we got the first edit through on I think it was the Thursday. No, it was the Friday. Yeah, it was the Friday. We got the first edit through, and it was probably the saddest thing I've ever seen. I felt like crying because we'd worked so hard to sort of really in the live space really be on the edge of that darkness all the time, and it just felt really like appropriate for the text and also the sort of ambiguity of the characters, and it was just kind of working really, really well, and the color was very delicate. It was, I think Mark, who took the photos, captured it perfectly. It was this really kind of like muted, like between, it was a sort of warm, kind of a bit green color that I'd spent ages with Laura like honing the right color. And the cameras just kind of obliterated all of that, and they just weren't letting enough light in, so it was very, very dark. And then because it was also balancing with the projection was very hard, because the projection was relatively dark. In the space it didn't feel it, but on the camera the projection looked very, very dark, and the lighting looked either too dark or too bright. It was just the contrast was just really weird. So we had a bit of a crisis meeting with the live streamers, and between me, Ravi, and Jenny, the movement director, we kind of completely reworked through the whole thing. We reframed all the cameras. We got them to change lenses. We added another camera. We moved quite a few cameras around. And then we re-edited the whole thing. So we sat down with the live stream team and we just went through moment by moment and decided where all the edits were going to be, which we were also doing around preview notes as well. So we'd do that in the morning, then we'd go and do live notes in the afternoon, then we'd go back and do live stream notes with the live streamers until like the 5-minute call, then we'd go and watch the preview, then we'd do on it. So it was really full on for a few days. It was super full on.
That is intense. What a return to work like.
It was really difficult, and it was the main problem was the recordings they were getting from the cameras were actually really good. It was the compression from the cameras onto the platform we were using for live streaming, which is kind of a YouTube kind of platform, but for theatre. But the bandwidth of it was so tiny that it flattened all of the kind of depth of colour and depth of shadow and light in the image. It really crunched it. And the problem is that we couldn't really replicate that when we were rehearsing with it. We had to watch it through the live stream to see it.
Right.
So we had these mad preview note sessions where where I had my computer with live stream on, and I also had a monitor with all of the camera views next to me, because I didn't have any monitoring during tech, which is what I originally wanted, but they just couldn't afford it.
Right.
So
I had assumed that you would have had a monitor. That's crazy.
No, so I lit it all without any idea what the live stream would look like until the dress rehearsal. And like I flagged it from the day I was contracted, like I really need to see what it's going to be live streamed. But I think it's a naivety, which is an understandable naivety because they're trying to save as much cash as possible. To try and claw back money. But I think what we really realised, and I think the theatre really realised, is because we had to lock down halfway through the run, and then it was a live stream only audience, and people were paying like potentially a full price ticket, like 30 quid to watch the stream. There's a real responsibility to suddenly get that right. And it's not this kind of add-on, it's actually the product. And it's quite scary being the person who is kind of solely responsible for making that look bad. Because I just didn't have the tools that I'd asked for really. So then in the preview sessions I like demanded that I had a monitor, and so I was watching the live output from the cameras on these monitors, altering the lighting states to make those look good, but also making sure that it was looking good live, because at that point we didn't know that we were locking down. Then watching the live stream output, but that was 30 seconds behind. So I would see what had happened 30 seconds ago with the compression. And then we were kind of working like 15-minute sections of the show like that. So I'd kind of edit what I think was going to look good, see that it looked good, make a note to go back and change it if it didn't. And then we'd then make our notes, go back and run that section again. And we did that a couple of times.
That is exhausting.
It was full on. And like Laura, my programmer, was like, I don't actually know how you're doing that. That would give me a massive headache. I'm thinking that myself. But it's good. I've learned loads from it, and I think I've learned where to put my foot down with it. And I think it'd be really interesting as a organisation, I think, to just think about how we communicate that collectively to theatres, I think, because it sort of feels like there is a real process that we've never worked with before. And it feels really different to TV as well, because I don't feel like I compromised on the live design at all, which I feel really proud about and really pleased, because I think from talking to people about how we had Molly Suttle, who is the video programmer who works on Small Island, at the National, and she was just talking through the process they had to film that. And it sounds like it was a real redesign in terms of lighting and video to kind of really suit the camera. From what she was saying, and it feels like it's a real new balance. But if you're actually going to live stream live work, feels like a really different, because you really don't want to compromise the live experience, particularly when you're using qualities that are very, very distinct to a live room, like darkness and like high contrast and like subtlety of color.
That's interesting. And do you think that your background in video meant you had a sort of awareness of what was when you watched that and you went, oh my god, like what's happening? Did your brain go, well, now hold on, you do know a bit about this and how to tackle it?
I did actually, and because I worked on a short film over lockdown of adapting a show that I made a few years ago, and I learned a lot about color grading in that process, and also like camera lenses and different cameras. So I think partly because of that knowledge, and also because of working with video generally, I think I did have a good sense of when I could say, no, actually, I think we should do this. Particularly in terms of like camera lenses, that was a real. It felt like I could have a very direct conversation with the live streamers about whether a lens was suitable or not, and also in terms of like the subtleties of the grading. But I think, to be honest, I could happily have spent another 5 days working on the live stream. To get it where we wanted to see, because even there was like discrepancy between the cameras in terms of color temperature and contrast, and like what's been great is a lot of people have said that they really loved the live stream and that they really felt it was effective. Other people haven't, which is also good to hear. But I could easily have we could have opened the show, got that to where we wanted to live, and then spent a whole other process getting the live stream to where we wanted it to be.
And if someone was going to be doing what you've done here, where would you send them to learn about those lenses and the color grading? And people from a background like us that is theatrical predominantly, where is there anything that you?
That's a good question. To be honest, I would actually recommend just watching some filmmaking tutorials on YouTube. There's a loads and loads of amazing like DP, director of photography kind of tutorials, and they just kind of take you through the kind of like the basics of how the lens works, what kind of different aperture lenses do, what different focal lengths do. And you don't need to know a huge amount of detail. I think it's just the principle of how it kind of works is really useful. And then it's also maybe worth, likewise on YouTube, just searching for some, so DaVinci Resolve, which is an editing suite that I use, they do a color grading tutorial. And although it's kind of irrelevant for what we would use it, we wouldn't be doing color grading as a lighting designer, but I think it talks you through the kind of principle of it in a really interesting way, particularly gamma. Gamma's a really big thing in video in terms of the kind of where the black point sits in an image. And that's a really useful thing to be able to communicate, is if the gamma's too high or it isn't enough, if the contrast isn't quite enough. So I think it's just understanding those terminologies is useful.
Yeah, definitely.
So I would recommend good old YouTube, actually. There's some really good tutorials on there.
Brilliant. Great. Did you have any other slides that you wanted to go through? Are we sort of...
I think it was just my images. I think that was, actually, yeah, I just wanted to quickly talk about pixel maps, just because it was a design revelation. So the challenge that we had was essentially moving that. So I was tracking the performers on the travelators continuously during the show, and it was just the sort of ambition is that they would travel down the travelator and be in a constant pool of light and darkness either side. And I've used pixel mapping quite a bit as I can't remember if we did an Itamika one at the Royal Court, but I can't remember if we did. But anyway, I've used pixel mapping a bit because I kind of like to be able to make video content sometimes for various things. And I was trying to rack my brain about how to keep the hotspot in the same point, but also travel over time. And
Mhm.
it felt very difficult to do that from a programming point of view, just going between two queues, because we kind of just shift the, the hotspot wouldn't move. It would just crossfade really.
Okay.
So I thought about using pixel maps. And so I created these images, which are just a series of kind of hotspots of different widths. And then we created pixel maps for each light box, which was like 120 pixels by one. And then because we had individual control over every cell on the X4.
Yeah.
And then in the pixel map server on EOS, we would then just use the tilt on the layer to move that hotspot up and down.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And it would just keep it would be it was really, really smooth because I made the images really big. But it was amazing actually, and it meant that I could really keep that hotspot really focused wherever they moved. And all I'd adjust if the timing change was just the focus time on that cue, which then also affected the encores. So I was only if something changed, it was very, very simple to respond to it. So it was a bit of a revelation. It kind of worked a lot better than I thought it might. But it was really brilliant. And then it also meant that we barely programmed the X4s in the conventional way. We pretty much programmed the whole thing as pixel maps. So everything that you saw was a kind of combination of different images on the pixel maps, rather than me like programming specific cells on the X4s. That was it, I think. Oh yeah, and this is the live stream setup
nice.
that they had. And yeah, you can really feel on this on the right hand side with the shot on the MacBook that the color temperature was cooler than it was in real life.
Yeah.
Because you can the iPhone camera actually kind of picks it up better. It was this kind of really weird like like dusty green sort of color.
Even just those images on the left and the right, you can see the sort of, you get an idea, don't you, of this sort of difference in color.
Yeah. But we just ran out of time really, and I could have easily have spent more time like really fine tuning it, but I had to go.
Yeah, that's the way it is, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. Nothing's ever finished, is it?
No, not at all.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you. That's fantastic to hear. I mean, my sort of final kind of question for you really is when you are working on something as the lighting designer and there is video involved, but it's not you, or vice versa, is that a hard thing to collaborate with someone else's brain, as it were, in terms of content of either medium?
It's different, I would say. It's weird in that everybody thinks really differently, and I have to like switch that part of my brain off really. But like on this, I really loved it. I actually found it really refreshing just to do lighting again, because I really loved Ravi and the way he works. And it's actually the way he works is not dissimilar to how I work, but he has a whole layer of depth that I haven't been able to explore before.
Okay.
So yeah, it is weird, and I think I just have to go with it. And I think what I have to remind myself is to not overpower in any way his process, and just to like let him do his thing, and then I can respond to it, and vice versa. It's sometimes really easy to let the video part of my brain be like, oh, you could just do this, but that's not helpful to him because he's on his own kind of journey with it. And the thing I really enjoy is then seeing where he goes with that, because it's quite often it's things that I would never think of doing, that I find really interesting or beautiful, and then I kind of respond to that. I think the thing that I found that halfway through the process I realized that we needed to talk about was where our overall kind of brightness point was, because as soon as I started putting the cameras in, the cameras just couldn't cope with how dark it all felt. And normally I would know sort of in my body how bright the projection could be, and then I'd sort of adapt everything to fit around that quite instinctively. Whereas I had no idea what they were, how much they'd brought levels down or lifted levels up. So we kind of had to have quite a big conversation about where our brightness point was at that point, which sort of then unravels all of your kind of thoughts about what you've made, if that makes sense, because you're like,
It does, yeah.
So that was interesting in terms, I think you all just kind of work very instinctively together, don't you? I think, or at least when it's good, that's kind of how it works best. But there's, I guess there's certain things that I realize I tell myself when I'm doing video that I don't have that conversation. But it was great. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, interesting to have that opportunity. Definitely. I don't know if any of you have any questions, folks, but if you do, please jump in, because we're just sort of just nearing the end there. I don't know if I can't actually see you all. I don't know where you've gone, but do just jump in.
Can I go to gallery view? I might just stop showing my screen and then I can.
Oh, okay, fine.
There we go. Sorry, I've spoken for ages.
No, not at all. Just before we started this, Josh was like, I'm not sure even an hour is quite long. I was like, honestly, it flies by. You wouldn't believe. But yes, so brilliant. What I've been doing with everyone is a couple of quick fire questions at the end, just to round us off. So I'm going to. I haven't seen the stream, but how did you sync the movements of the travelators and the lights tracking?
Oh yeah, they were very analog. So it was just two guys in the basement with two like dials, who were brilliant. So it was very analog, and a lot of it was just cueing, like very good cueing from Anna, the DSM, and me timing a lot of stuff in rehearsals, and in tech as well, to be honest. But there's a point right at the end of the show where they all stand at the back of the travelators, and then over the rest of the text of the play, they just very slowly move forward to the front. And what I didn't realize is that travelators are very affected by weight. So we had a top camera that the guys on the dials were using, and I timed the lights to fit perfectly, sort of relatively perfectly to the text. But they could see where those lights were as they were moving. So they would just like adjust the speed of the travelators to make sure they were still in the light, which was amazing. And they were so up for it.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it was really cool. It was very, very analog.
It's sort of the modern day equivalent of landing the tabs on the button of the music, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly like that. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
It's good.
Brilliant. Right, I'm going to give you these questions, and then we're going to go. They're a bit silly. That's the point. But one piece of advice that you would. Oh, hold on. Oh, false start again. Were there any points where colours you wanted to choose just wouldn't show up on camera?
Oh yeah, totally. So there was a whole section when the revolve's going around where we actually shift into this quite like sharp sort of green tint. Which looked nice in the space. It was quite like sort of quite teal, but on camera you just can't see it at all. And we only really discovered that color in the last preview, because we were sort of like playing around with it all the way through. And yeah, it didn't look. You couldn't see it on the live stream, but by that point it was too late, and I had to go. So yes, there was definitely like color shifts in various sections that. The warmer ones read well, but the other kind of colours didn't read at all. So for the time again, I would have like fine-tuned that with the stream.
Yeah, is that something that you'd consider going forward? Would you be nervous going forward that doing another show that was going to be streamed, the colours wouldn't be possible?
Yeah, definitely. I think you can kind of understand where TV lighting comes from once you've gone through that, because I think the colours are so much stronger in TV, and I imagine that in live they probably look really quite garish, but to camera it kind of really works. So yeah, I think I would definitely want to work with a monitor next time for sure.
Right, final call. Any questions? Last chance. Gonna go for it. It's sort of a bad auction now, isn't it? Right, Josh, one piece of advice that you'd give yourself 5 years ago.
Oh yeah, I've got a good one. Well, it's a bit sincere, but it's that I'm an artist, I think when I was like coming out of college, and even at college, I just didn't think of myself as an artist.
Okay.
I was a designer, or like I don't know. But I think I've really evolved over time and spoken to a lot of fellow like creatives, and just realised that what we do is we do work as artists. Like we're really storytelling and all of the kind of nuances around making good theatre is about a much like bigger sort of sphere of yourself as a human than just doing lighting. And like it's obviously our central focus, but there's loads of stuff that goes underneath that. And I think, yeah, I just had this moment a few years ago where I was like, oh, I'm an artist. I am an artist. I work as an artist. And to feel like confident and proud of that, I think, rather than feeling like inferior and like a fraud. So yeah, I think it's really helped me since feeling like that. Actually, it's kind of made me feel stronger about having a voice in a process and feeling like I can kind of invest in myself. That's what I think.
Good. Good. I now feel I can't ask this next question. It's so ridiculous in comparison. If you were a sandwich filling, what would you be and why?
Ooh. Or would probably be like something multi-layered, like maybe something probably that shouldn't go together.
Oh, okay.
Like peanut butter and Marmite or something like that.
I love it. It could be a surprisingly good combination, though. Who knows? That's
it's one of my partner's favourites.
Say that again.
It's one of my partner's favourites. It's not mine.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
One thing that you like to do to unwind after a stressful week?
Gardening. Oh my god.
Oh, nice.
So we will understand this. Yeah. I've just lockdown discovery is just going outside.
Yeah.
And gardening. I used to live on a narrowboat before moving down to Cornwall, and moving the narrowboat was my proper wind down after tech. So I think just being outside and doing something really like super analog, no screens, very practical.
Yeah.
I love that.
You realise things are actually really beautiful. It's just you don't ever look at them. It sometimes feels. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. It was weird being back in a black box actually, and just for weeks after. Yeah, I'd sort of go on a walk a lot during lockdown.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. And did you find when you were in that black box, did you feel that you wanted to escape, like at lunchtimes and stuff? Were you like, I want to get out of the building?
Weirdly, not actually. I really enjoyed the walk home at the
Yeah.
end of the day. That was a really like ritual. But actually, one thing that I found really weird is during tech and just working generally, me and Laura, my programmer, who was like sat like a few meters away from me, we took our masks off because we had enough space, and it was just a lot easier to be able to communicate without them. And we'd be working and doing stuff, and I totally forgot we were in COVID times and lockdown. It was really nice. I was just like, and then I'd have to get up and like go and talk to somebody and have to put my mask on. And I was like, oh shit, we're still in these times. Oh, I'd like went into a really nice little bubble of pre-COVID.
Yeah, it's a funny feeling when you forget like that. A nice feeling, albeit.
A really nice feling.
My final question for you: if you were going to write an award-winning autobiography, what would the title be?
I'm really bad at things like this. I don't know. Into the Light.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Or we could just call it Analog. I think Analog's quite a good one of it.
Nice.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Josh, for taking the time to go through this.
A pleasure.
And yeah, I hope it makes a wee return at some point, because it'd be good for even more people to see it at some point, whether that's in person or online. That'd be good.
I've got a much smaller rig to rig this time, so that's good.
Exactly. Yeah. Brilliant. Right. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rory. So nice to see familiar faces.